let me ask you this. When it comes to economic reporting out of China, from your perspective and your experience, how much of it is accurate? How much of it is creative accounting? And how much is just outright fabrication?
I think that's an interesting question. When it comes to the data, I think it's very, very clear that it is all their data is basically all fabricated. When I was living with Chinese data on a daily basis, you could literally see them go back in and make changes week to week. And as a simple example, a lot of economics works in a lot of economic data should work in a pyramid type structure where it's kind of like 1 + 1 = 2 at a low level of data. Then you work and you go, oh well, 2 + 2 = 4, and you kind of can build up to, okay, well these are what final numbers. Well, it would not be uncommon, and we saw an example of it this year in China, where they reported very robust growth for the year of 5%, and somehow tax revenue declined 3%. I mean, that's a gap of 8%, and they seem to be going in opposite directions. Okay. And
Mm.
there were times you could go in and literally see them making changes in data day to day. So when it comes to the actual data, it's simply not trustworthy. When it comes to the economic reporting, one of the problems that is very accurate in a lot of reporting is that I don't know. There might be one or two outlets that still actually have reporters in China, but all of the reporting that you're seeing done is being done from New York City, and there's probably of any reporter that I know of that is considered on the China economics beat or the China beat. There's probably only a couple that have any what I would call any type of depth of connection in China, about of just people they can call on to say, hey, tell me what do you know? And so it's actually, I think it's giving, and I'm not saying intentionally, but I do think it definitely is not giving an accurate picture of what is going on in China. And to be fair, China has kicked out basically all the reporters, so it is harder for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I take your point. It's not intentional on the part of the people covering it, the reporters covering it from outside. It's certainly intentional on the part of the CCP. And that's a real combination, right? If what you're saying is, look, the data isn't trustworthy and there's no transparency from the outside, then that begs the question, for Western companies looking to do business in China, because I think the Chinese market, grabbing the Chinese market has always been sort of the holy grail for a lot of multinationals. But if you can't do any proper due diligence, what are you building your business on?
No, that's exactly correct. And in fact, China has basically even made it illegal to do due diligence. So, like if you were thinking of setting up a China business or a China subsidiary, there are, everything from consulting to security firms that you would say, hey, I need a due diligence report on this site, or who my joint venture partner might be. And, technically and really pragmatically, those are illegal now. I mean, think about that. It's basically illegal to do a background report on who my joint venture partner is. I mean, in most of the world, that would be almost, that would be considered crazy, but that's the reality of China. So, it still is baffling to me to a degree why firms do that. One great example, there was a study about a year ago. China said that they were, working to become compliant with IP laws, and even 90%, even the government office in Beijing in charge of IP laws, they were using pirated Microsoft software. Okay, so and so you saw similar numbers about the number of pirated Microsoft copies throughout China. And so even a company like Microsoft, it's like, look, I understand why you would want to get into the market. The reality is that you're not going to, and you're not going to make any money. because there's so much pirated software.
Now, looking at the current conflict, right, the trade war that's going on, and the tariff back and forth, and retaliatory measures taken by the Chinese government. Look, you've said before, I think, paraphrasing, that China is heading for serious trouble. So, what does that look like? I mean, where do you think they're heading? I had very interesting conversations just recently with some folks, very smart individuals, who were like, "Look, China is on the rise," and their point was, we believe that the U.S. is on the decline. So at some point, those two countries collide. But is that your perception, or are we getting it wrong when we think somehow that China is ascending?
The way that I would put it is this way. Let's back up and say, how does China view itself? China, as the word in Chinese, is frequently translated as Middle Kingdom, and that is technically accurate. That is technically accurate, but it does not mean middle in the way that most Americans or Westerners would think of it. And when we think of middle, we think of almost like the middle seat in an airplane row. Okay, where I don't get the aisle, I don't get the window, I'm in the middle seat. But that's not what it means in Chinese.
But you know what you do get, Christopher? You get both armrests, right? That's just airplane etiquette. If you got, I'm just telling our people again, all our viewers, you got to remember that if you're in the middle seat, you got to claim both those armrests, because that's your right. That's your God-given privilege.
You got to tell the others who's
I
boss.
digress. Yeah, exactly.
Middle in Chinese means something much closer to the middle of the universe, around which the rest of the planets rotate. It's almost more like the sun, okay? And the planets rotate around the sun, okay? And so the reason I mention that is it's not just that China views itself as ascending in power terms, either in absolute or relative power terms. It is that China views itself as returning to its central place of primacy in the world, okay? So it's not just that it's ascending relative to the United States. It's not just that, hey, we're getting bigger. It is that we're returning to our place of primacy as the center of the universe, I think is a better way to think about it. So when you think about, well, and now let's move forward, but still, not quite up to current history. China has been preparing for this decade and probably the next few years for many years. And one of the things she wanted to do is, and put in a plan, and this started roughly a decade ago, and you don't hear the term used anymore, but he put in place something called Made in China 2025. And basically he wanted to remove Chinese dependency on technology and other sources from around the world. Okay, whether it was certain metals, or whether it was U.S. chips, all kinds of different things that he viewed as potentially a choke point that others could use against China. And so we've seen just this week that China's rolling out new parts of its global payment system. Okay, so they really targeted addressing all of what they saw as their weak points on the global stage. And so that kind of, I would say, brings us up to current history. Well, why are they doing this? Chairman Xi put in basically earlier this decade, late last decade, told his generals, we want to be in a place where in 2027 we can take Taiwan. Okay? Now, I'm not saying he will try to take Taiwan by force. I am saying you can clearly see that these things are not necessarily different, okay? That they're not necessarily running on independent tracks. And whether it's Taiwan or whether it's those other issues, Xi has clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this. So what is the current state of the Chinese economy? I think it's very clear, and to a degree, reasonable people would argue over this, but I think just about everyone would say that the Chinese economy is not strong. Okay, we might argue over what degree of not strong, or is it potentially even contracting? things like that. But I think just about everyone would say it's not strong. And at that point, you get into all kinds of, well, what if exports decline, because it is a export dependent economy? Would this possibly push him to act on Taiwan? Other issues like that. But I think you see all of these issues kind of coming together.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.